All right.
Usually when I start, it's usually standing up in an opening, but I understand just for educational purposes, we're gonna do that. So I always start in the top left corner, and I put painter's tape up here to hold it in place. You can put a small piece of spline in the center so you're not trying to hold the fabric and all that. This is a little different because it's not the channel that it drops down in like on our normal extrusions. So what I actually do is I will find where the spline goes in, and I just pre-roll a little bit. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take the spline and you tuck it in closest to the opening first. And then all you're gonna do is basically push it down in.
Wow. Okay.
And then as you roll across, you'll see it come out of the tape. Now, like I always teach in the class, it's an art. It's not something you're gonna learn overnight, so don't get frustrated.
Oh, I was trying to do it probably for about 4 hours.
Now we're gonna try and pull a lot of these wrinkles out. Now all I'm doing is taking a utility knife. It stops, the next spline channel comes down like this. All I'm doing is cutting it so it will tuck down in there. And that's where your strength lies.
It's in the corners?
Well, it's when it gets all the way underneath.
Okay.
So if you have to go back and roll it, the top one is your most crucial, because when you're pulling, this is what's going to hold everything while you're trying to stretch it out all the way through the whole opening.
Oh, okay. Great.
So now, some people start and they go in a circle all the way around the panel.
Okay.
Bug screen you can do that with because you don't see fingers and ripples like you do in solar screen. I don't like doing that with solar screen. So I usually do the top, I pull to the bottom, which this one has a bar in the center. So I pull that rail and then I roll that in. And that's where you can pull and pull it tight. And then I start on the left side and then go to the right side. And I go down 6, 8, 12 inches, whatever on one side. And then I pull the other and I roll it down. And I work my way down. So that way when you get to one of the bottom corners, if you've got a finger, you're only working in that little corner, not having to redo a whole thing. Now, rolling into triangles are by far the hardest. I hate those because you don't have a flat surface at the top to start with. So you have to start on a straight edge. And a lot of guys will start this straight edge and then they go across the bottom and then they try and work up the corner of the slope. That's where it gets tricky. Sometimes those take the longest by far of all of them to ever have to mess with.
Okay.
All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna come down here and I'm gonna roll the bottom. See, it's in there.
Yeah.
And then as you're rolling, put a little bit of tension on it. And as it goes across, now this is like a normal screen channel, so it's more like a U shape. It's not, and as you can see, it's got a pucker. You can always, as you're adjusting, and you can see, even I run into some. Now you're gonna get some puckering because there's nothing on the sides holding it at the moment. So just kind of go at your own pace. Don't try and rush through the whole thing, because the more puckers you get, the harder it is to roll it and get them out. And in the winter months, when it's harder to roll this fabric, that's when I usually set it out in the yard and let it get warm by the sun. And it makes it a little easier to roll it, because once you start getting down to below 50 degrees, even bug screen's hard to roll.
So would it be better to do a door inside?
Well, it will. It's just most of the installers,
do it on the property?
Do it on the property.
Okay.
They do it on job site. See? Nice and taut. Now be careful with the knife because I have right through the panel you just got through doing. See, I know there's, this comes down over here. You can cut it a little short if you want. Just be very careful so you don't cut the fabric. Especially a lighter color, you can't really fix it. A darker color, sometimes you can pull out the corners of the spline, move the fabric right or left if you need to, but if you've already trimmed it and it's the very last corner you're trimming, you've got to redo the whole thing. And if you're only ordered enough fabric to do just that panel, sometimes you're kind of in a pinch.
Let's talk about fabric and how it's ordered.
Okay, so fabric comes by the yard. Now by the yard is 36 inches, which is 3 feet. Now our fabric comes 120 to 126 inch rolls. So you just have to know the orientation of how you need the fabric to go. If you have a big shade next to it, then you know the way you order it, 3 feet wide would cover a 3-foot door because that's the lines are going the same way as the shade. But if it's a smaller shade, then you might have to order it the opposite direction, so the lines all match as it goes across the porch. So 3 feet, 1 yard, 120, 126 inches. I think on the software, it says out to the side, it's like 120, 126, or 132. Only bug screens come 11 foot. But that's the only rolls we have. You might be familiar in the solar screen industry of there being smaller rolls that are available. Yes, but that's solar screen. 3 foot, 4 foot, we don't carry those rolls.
Okay.
So if somebody is, well, why don't y'all have smaller? We just don't order it that way because we don't stock it. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna start on one side. So if it's standing up, I would start on the left. Just like we did before, you're just gonna start pre-rolling. Now I cut 2 pieces because I'm gonna be rolling at the same time both sides.
Oh, so you're going left to right to kind of...
So it helps pull and stretch as I'm rolling down, and it gets a lot of those fingers out that you might see. When I used to roll these before, if we had to roll them inside, it was usually on a flat table. On sawhorse, it's a little more challenging. Now, solar screen is very hard to roll, so if you pre-roll it first, it helps you get your spline down in there. Now, because the other side I went maybe 8 to 12 inches down, this side now I can go a little farther because I can pull over there.
Tommy, does spline come in different colors?
No,
Okay.
not flat spline. Flat spline is only available in black. Round spline you can get in a gray. I think years ago somebody played with a white. Only problem is white yellows when it's out in the sun, and then it gets brittle. Now you might have noticed when we pulled this out, it had the spline all the way down through the bar here, because whenever there's a bar and there's spline grooves on both sides, when these manufacturers make it, it's a machine that does it. They don't hand roll anything. It's a pre-made machine that does the doors. So all they do is they roll the whole panel and they cut it right down the center, and then they spline the top and bottom bars. My best friend, when he used to do it, they did it that way too. If they had to rescreen something, it was just easier. But I always, each one individual. So now I've stopped at the bar. Now I'm not gonna pull the spline or cut it just yet because I want to finish the other side. So if I have a finger somewhere, it's very easy to
What are you referring to as a finger?
So you might get a little pucker like this is here.
Okay.
It's a little fold because if you don't hold it exactly right when you're rolling, that fabric's gonna wiggle because
Okay.
there's lines, it's threads. It's kind of like staying in your lane when you're driving. Now there is some dealers that are very critical about their lines. You know, all the lines have to run the same way. You know, you have to count the threads. To be honest, no you don't. But that's that whole panel right there. Now, the little bit of folds that you see right now is just from carrying it. That's why we don't like to fold fabric when we do remakes for our shades, because sometimes these stay in a little more. Bug screens, it doesn't come out as quick. Solar screens, usually the sun will pull it out. It does take a long period of time though.
Okay, so it should be left in the sun and maybe...
Yeah, well, I mean, once he puts this up, a lot of this will disappear because the sun's going to
Hit it?
hit it and stretch it out some.
Okay.
Now, I did not have any puckers or fingers anywhere that are causing any problems. So at this point, I can just trim the spline on both sides. And I just roll that corner where I cut it off so it stays down in there. If you leave that tab sticking out, what'll happen is something might snag it, or if it gets loose, that spline will come out, and once you trim it and it comes out, you're stuck. You got to re-roll the whole thing all over again.
Okay.
So there's one of two ways to trim this. My best friend did it one way differently because his guys were notorious for cutting the fabric. So some people lay it over and cut on the spline itself, so you're not worrying about cutting this. So you can trim right along the edge here, and I might have a dull blade. I do.
Okay, new blade.